all, it's Grandma again. I have another chapter from Little House in the Big Woods. This chapter is called Summertime. Now it was summertime and people went visiting. Sometimes Uncle Henry or Uncle George or Grandpa came riding out of the big woods to see Pa. Ma would come to the door and ask how all the folks were, and then she would say, "Charles is in the clearing." And then she would cook more dinner than usual, and dinner time would be longer. Pa and Ma and the visitor would sit talking a while before they went back to work. Sometimes Ma let Mary and Laura go across the road and down the hill to see Mrs. Peterson. The Petersons had just moved in. Their house was new, and it was always very neat because Mrs. Peterson had no little girls to mess it up. She was a Swede, and she let Laura and Mary look at the pretty things she had brought from Sweden, lace and colored embroidery and china. Mrs. Peterson talked Swedish to them, and they talked English to her, and somehow they understood each other perfectly. She always gave them each a cookie before they left, and they nibbled the cookies very slowly as they walked home. Laura nibbled away exactly half of hers, and Mary nibbled away exactly half of hers, and the other halves they saved for baby Carrie. Then, when they got home, Carrie had 2 half cookies, and that was a whole cookie. But this wasn't right. All they wanted to do was divide the cookies fairly with Carrie. But still, if Mary saved half of her cookie while Laura ate the whole of hers, or if Laura saved half of hers and Mary ate her whole cookie, then it wouldn't be fair either. They didn't know what to do, so they each saved half and gave it to baby Carrie. But they always felt like somehow it wasn't fair. Sometimes a neighbor sent word that the family was coming to spend the day. Then Ma did extra cleaning and cooking and opened the package of store sugar. And on the day set a wagon would come driving up to the gate in the morning, and there would be strange children to play with. When Mr. and Mrs. Hewlett came, they brought Ava and Clarence with them. Ava was a pretty girl with dark eyes and black curls. She played carefully and always kept her dress clean and smooth. Mary liked that, but Laura liked better to play with Clarence. Clarence was red-headed and freckled and always laughing. His clothes were pretty, too. He wore a blue suit buttoned all the way up the front with bright gilt buttons and trimmed with braid, and he had copper-toed shoes. The strips of copper across the toes were glittering so bright that Laura wished she was a boy. Little girls didn't get to wear copper toes. Laura and Clarence ran and shouted and climbed trees, while Mary and Ava walked nicely together and talked. So here's a picture of Laura and Clarence climbing a tree. And you can see his shoes have little tiny copper toes. Ma and Mrs. Hewlett visited, and they looked at Godey's Ladies' Book, which Mrs. Hewlett had brought. And Pa and Mr. Hewlett looked at the horses and the crops and smoked their pipes. Once Aunt Lottie came to spend the day. That morning Laura had to stand still a long time while Ma unwound her hair from the cloth strings and combed it into long curls. Mary was already ready, sitting primly on a chair with her golden curls shining and her little china blue dress fresh and crisp. Laura liked her own red dress, but Ma pulled at her hair dreadfully, and it was brown instead of golden, so that nobody noticed it. Everyone noticed and admired Mary's. "There," Ma said at last, "your hair is curled beautifully, and Lottie is coming. Run to meet her, both of you, and ask her which she likes best, brown curls or golden curls." So Laura and Mary ran out of the door and down the path, for Aunt Lottie was already at the gate. Lottie was a big girl, much taller than Mary. Her dress was beautiful pink, and she was swinging a pink sunbonnet by one string. "Which do you like best, Aunt Lottie?" Mary asked, "brown curls or golden curls?" Ma had told them to ask that, and Mary was a very good little girl who always did exactly as she was told. Laura waited to hear what Aunt Lottie would say, and she felt miserable. "Well, I like both kinds best," Aunt Lottie said, smiling, and she took Laura and Mary by the hand, one at either side, and they danced along to the door where Ma stood. The sunshine came streaming through the windows into the house, and everything was so neat and pretty. The table was covered with a red cloth, and the cook stove was polished, shining black. Through the bedroom door, Laura could see the trundle bed in its place under the big bed. The pantry door stood wide open, giving the sight and smell of goodies on the shelves, and Black Susan came purring down the stairs from the attic, where she had been taking a nap. It was all so pleasant, and Laura felt so gay and good, that no one would have ever thought that she could be as naughty as she was that evening. Aunt Lottie had gone, and Laura and Mary were tired and cross. They were at the woodpile gathering a pan of chips to kindle the fire in the morning. They hated to pick up the chips, but every day they had to do it. Tonight they hated it more than ever. Laura picked up the biggest chip, and Mary said, "I don't care. Aunt Lottie likes my hair best anyway. Golden hair is lots prettier than brown." Laura's throat swelled tight, and she could not speak. She knew that golden hair was prettier than brown, and she could not speak, so she reached out quickly and slapped Mary's face. And then she heard Pa say, "Come here, Laura." Oh, she went slowly, dragging her feet. Pa was sitting just inside the door. He had seen her slap Mary. "You remember," Pa said, "I told you girls that you must never strike each other." Laura began, "But Mary said—" "But that makes no difference," said Pa. "It is what I say that you must mind." And then he took the strap down from the wall, and he spanked Laura with the strap. Laura sat on a chair in the corner, and she sobbed, and when she stopped sobbing she sulked. The only thing in the world to be glad about was that now Mary had to fill the chip pan all by herself. At last, when it was getting dark, Pa said again, "Come here, Laura." His voice was kind, and when Laura came close, he took on her knee and hugged her. She sat in the crook of his arm, with her head against his shoulder, and his long brown whiskers partly covering her eyes, and everything felt all right again. She told Pa all about it, and then she asked him, "You don't like golden hair better than brown, do you?" And Pa's blue eyes shone down at her, and he said, "Well, Laura, my hair is brown." She had not thought of that. Pa's hair was brown, and his whiskers were brown, and she thought brown was a lovely color. But she was glad that Mary had to gather all the chips. In the summer evenings, Pa did not tell stories or play the fiddle. Summer days were long, and he was very tired because he had worked all day in the fields. Ma was busy too. Laura and Mary helped her weed the garden, and they helped her feed the calves and the hens, and they gathered the eggs, and they helped make cheese. When the grass was tall and thick in the woods, the cows were giving plenty of milk, and that was the time to make cheese. Somebody must kill a calf, for cheese could not be made without rennet, and rennet is in the lining of a young calf's stomach. The calf must be very young so that it has not eaten anything but milk. Laura was afraid that Pa must kill one of the little calves in the barn. They were so sweet. One was fawn-colored and one was red, and their hair was so soft, and their large eyes were so sweet. Laura's heart beat fast when Ma talked to Pa about making cheese. Well, Pa would not kill either of his calves because they were heifers and would grow into cows. So he went to Grandpa's and to Uncle Henry's and talked about cheese making, and Uncle Henry said he would kill one of his calves. There would be enough rennet for Aunt Polly and Grandma and Ma. So Pa went again to Uncle Henry's and came back with a little piece of the little calf's stomach. It was like a piece of soft, grayish-white leather, all ridged and rough on one side. When the cows were milked at night, Ma set the milk away in pans. In the morning, she skimmed off the cream to make butter later. Then, when the morning's milk had cooled, she mixed it with the skimmed milk and set it all on the stove to heat. A little bit of the rennet, tied in cloth, was soaking in warm water. When this milk was heated enough, Ma squeezed every drop of water from the rennet into the cloth, and she poured the water into the milk. and then she stirred it well and left it in a warm place by the stove. In a little while it was thickened into a smooth, quivery mass. With a long knife, Ma cut this mass into little squares and let it stand while the curd separated from the whey. Then she poured it all out into a cloth and let the thin, yellowish whey drain out. When no more whey dropped into the cloth, Ma emptied the curd into a big pan and salted it, turning it and mixing it well. Now look here. Here's a picture of Laura and Ma. And looks like Laura's stirring some curds and Ma is getting the hoop ready to put the curds into. Laura and Mary were always there, helping all they could. They loved to eat bits of the curd when Ma was salting it. It squeaked in their teeth. Under a cherry tree outside the back door, Pa had put up a board to press the cheese on. He cut 2 grooves the length of the board and laid the board on blocks, one end a little higher than the other, and under the lower end he stood an empty pail. So Ma put her wooden cheese hoop on the board, and she spread a clean wet cloth all over the inside of it and filled it with the heaping full with the chunks of salted curd. She covered this with another clean wet cloth and laid on top of it a round board cut small enough to go inside the cheese hoop, and then she lifted a heavy rock on top of the board. All day long the round board settled slowly under the weight of the rock, and they pressed out and ran down, and the whey pressed out and ran down the grooves of the board into the pail. The next morning Ma would take out the round pale yellow cheese as large as a milk pan. Then she made more curd and filled the cheese hoop again. Every morning she took a new cheese out of the press and trimmed it smooth. She sewed a cloth tightly around it, and then she rubbed the cloth all over with fresh butter. Then she put the cheese on a shelf in the pantry. Every day she wiped the cheese carefully with a wet cloth, and then rubbed it all over with fresh butter once more, and laid it down on its other side. After a great many days the cheese was ripe, and there was a hard rind all over it. Then Ma wrapped the cheese in paper and laid it away on a high shelf. There was nothing more to do with it but eat it. Laura and Mary liked cheese making. They liked to eat the curd that squeaked in their teeth, and they liked to eat the edges that Ma pared off of the big round yellow cheeses to make them smooth before she sewed them up in the cloth. Ma laughed at them for eating green cheese. "The moon is made of green cheese, some people say," she told them. The new cheese did not look like the round moon when it came up behind the trees. Or the new cheese did look like the round moon when it came up behind the trees, but it was green. It was not green, it was yellow like the moon. "Well, it's green," Ma said, "because it isn't ripened yet. When it's cured and ripened, it won't be a green cheese." "Is the moon really made of green cheese?" Laura asked, and Ma laughed. "I think people say that because it looks like a green cheese," she said, "but appearances are deceiving." Then she wiped all the green cheeses and rubbed them down with butter, and she told them about the cold, dead moon that is like a little world on which nothing grows. The first day Ma made cheese, Laura tasted the whey. She tasted it without saying anything to Ma, and when Ma turned around and saw her face, Ma laughed. That night, while she was washing the supper dishes and Laura and Mary were wiping them, Ma told Pa that Laura had tasted the whey and he didn't like it. "Oh, you wouldn't starve to death on Ma's whey like old Grimes did on his wife's." Laura begged him to tell a story about old Grimes, so though Pa was very tired, he took his fiddle out of the box and he played and sang for Laura. "Old Grimes is dead, that good old man, we ne'er shall see him more. He used to wear an old gray coat, all buttoned down before. Old Grimes's wife made skim milk cheese, old Grimes he'd drink the whey, and then there came a east wind from the west and blew old Grimes away." "So there you have it," said Pa. "She was a mean, tight-fisted woman. If she hadn't skimmed all the milk, a little cream might have run off into the whey, and old Grimes would have staggered along. But she skimmed off every bit of the cream, and poor old Grimes got so thin that the wind blew him away, plumb starved to death. Pa looked at Ma and said, "Nobody would starve to death while you were around, Caroline." "Well, no," Ma said. "No, Charles, not if you were there to provide for us." Pa was pleased. It was all so pleasant, and the doors and windows wide open to the summer evening, and the dishes were making cheerful little sounds as Ma washed them, and Mary and Laura wiped, and Pa put away his fiddle, and smiling and whistling softly to himself. After a while he said, "I'm going over to Henry's tomorrow morning, Caroline, to borrow his grubbing hoe. Those sprouts are getting waist high around the stumps in the wheat field. A man has to keep everlasting at it, or the woods'll take back the place." So early next morning he started to walk to Uncle Henry's. But before long he came hurrying back, hitched the horses to the wagon, and threw in his axe and 2 wash tubs and the wash boiler and all the pails and wooden buckets there were. "I don't know if I'll need them all, Caroline," he said, "but I'd hate to want them and not have them." "Oh, what is it? What is it?" Laura asked, jumping up and down with excitement. "Pa's found a bee tree," Ma said. "Maybe he'll bring us some honey." It was noon before Pa came driving home. Laura had been watching for him, and she ran out to the wagon as soon as it stopped by the barnyard, but she could not see into it. Pa called, "Caroline, if you'll come take this pail of honey, I'll go unhitch." Ma came out to the wagon, disappointed. She said, "Well, Charles, even a pail of honey is something." And then she looked into the wagon, and she threw up her hands. Pa laughed. All of the pails and buckets were heaping full of dripping golden honeycomb. Both of the wash tubs were piled full, and so was the wash boiler. So Pa and Ma went back and forth, carrying all the loaded tubs and the wash boiler, all in the buckets and pails into the house, and Ma heaped a plate high with the golden pieces and covered all the rest neatly with cloths. For dinner they had as much of the delicious honey as they could eat, and Pa told them how he found the bee tree. "I didn't take my gun," he said, "because I wasn't hunting, and now it's summer there's not so much of a danger of meeting trouble. Panthers and bears are so fat this time of year they're lazy and good-natured. So I took a short cut through the woods, and I nearly ran into a big bear. I came around a clump of underbrush, and there he was, not as far as from me as across the room. He looked at me, and I guess he saw that I didn't have a gun. Anyway, he didn't pay any more attention to me. He was standing at the foot of a big tree, and the bees were buzzing all around him. They couldn't sting him through his thick fur. He kept brushing them away from his head with a paw. I stood there watching him, and he put the other paw into a hole in the tree, and he drew it out all dripping with honey, and he licked the honey off his paw and reached in for more. But by that time I'd found me a club. I wanted that honey myself, so I made a great racket, banging the club against the tree and yelling. And the bear was so fat and so full of honey he just dropped on all fours and waddled off among the trees. I chased him some distance and got him going fast away from the bee tree, and then I came back here for the wagon." Laura asked how he got the honey away from the bees. "Well, that was easy," Pa said. "I left the horses back in the woods where they wouldn't get stung, and then I chopped down the tree and it split it open." "Didn't the bees sting you?" "No," said Pa, "bees never sting me." The whole tree was hollow, and it was filled from top to bottom with honey. The bees must have been storing honey there for years. Some of it was old and dark, but I guess I got enough of the good, clean honey to last us a long time. Here's a picture of the bear and the bee tree. Laura was sorry for the poor bees. She said they worked so hard, and now they won't have any honey. But Pa said there was lots of honey left to the bees, and another large hollow tree nearby into which they could move. He said it was time for them to have a clean new home. They would take the old honey that he had left in the old tree, and they would make it into fresh new honey and store it in their new house. And they would save every drop of the spilled honey and put it away, and then they would have plenty of honey again long before the winter came. So next time we will hear about harvest. Bye.